Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. Today, following the success of a recent video where we went over a few luxury sewing tips to improve the quality of your projects, I thought I'd actually rewind it. That's so cringy. I thought I'd actually rewind things today and revisit the basics, because over in the DPL Atelier, my high value low cost fashion membership, we have not long celebrated our 2-year anniversary, or Atelierversary as I like to call it. So today I thought I would give you some top tips to help you get started, or maybe just refresh what you already know. Let's jump right on into it then. I hate these long introductions, but my first top tip would be, if you are struggling to sew straight lines, don't look at your needle and thread on the sewing plate. Have a little look at the edge of your fabric. And if you actually redirect your focus to the edge of your fabric, you'll be able to control that seam allowance width, noticing when it gets wider and narrower. Give it a go. It's really hard to kind of show you. Obviously, it's where I'm looking, not necessarily what I'm doing with my hands, but it's a really quick and easy way to improve the straightness of your stitches. I would also just revisit knowing if you have the right or wrong tension. Now, before you change your tension setting on your dial, there may be a few things already to consider, such as, is your machine threaded correctly? Have you dropped your bobbin case? Has it potentially gone a little bit out of shape? Are you using the right thread for your machine? I know that my machine, my brother industrial one, is very incompatible with cheap quality thread, so yours might be the same. It might be a case of making sure that your top thread and your bobbin thread are the exact same, so that there's no discrepancies there. Is the weight of your thread appropriate? Are you using the right needle for your project, the right size machine needle? There are a lot of things to consider, but if you have kind of worked through all of those and your bobbin thread or your top thread, the tension is still wrong, then you know to change them. To know if your tension is wrong, just have a little look at your line of stitches. You might be able to make this an easier process by doing different contrasting colours, so that you can clearly see what your bobbin thread is versus what your top stitch thread is, or the upper thread. If the right side of your work has tiny little loops on it coming through, meaning that your bobbin thread is being pulled a little bit to the top, then it is a sign that your top thread tension is too tight, so it's pulling everything up. What we are aiming for is to have the top and the bottom looking exactly the same. And then vice versa, if on the wrong side of your fabric you have little loops coming through, that's a signal that your bobbin thread is too tight. And so it's going to be a case of readjusting the dials and tension, loosening it up a little bit in order to get the right appearance. I always tell my members to sample. I must sound like a broken record. So with a little bit of scrap fabric, you'll be able to test this no problem. If you are testing your thread tension for a specific project, make sure that you're using a scrap bit of fabric that reflects your final textile, so that you can have a realistic representation. And just to increase the top thread tension, the higher the number, the tighter the tension, and the lower the number, obviously, the looser the tension. With a bobbin, in my case, it's a case of increasing or decreasing a screw. So just have a play around with it. And as I say, what you're looking for is a perfectly matched top right side of your work and bottom underside wrong side of your work. Poor thread tension can actually lead to weakened seams. It can create a really unsightly look. So we really want that professionalism to be there. And tension, although it might be a bit of a head scratcher at first, once you understand what you're looking for, is a really easy way to elevate your sewing projects. Next up, I want you to give real considered thought to preparation being key. Now, I know many of us, especially when we're being creative, can be so impatient. All I want to do is sew a garment and magically have it in front of me. I always say it's kind of like building a house, where the external skeleton of it goes up very quickly, but then all the kind of interiors and the wiring and the lighting takes a lot of time. It's kind of the same with garment construction. We can create the shell of something really quickly, but when you're doing the lining or you're hand finishing your hems, it can really slow it down. So the impatience can creep in for sure. But preparing your garments is going to result in a professional finish. So that is matching up your grain line, making sure you are cutting on the appropriate straight grain, cross grain, bias grain, whatever your pattern indicates. A really good top tip for making sure that that is equal all along your pattern piece is lining it up to the selvage if you are doing a straight grain cut, and making sure with a tape measure you're measuring along that grain line and the measurement to the selvage edge is equal all the way along. Once you have that first pattern piece laid, you can lay the next, matching that grain line to the first pattern piece grain line, and this is going to really help you secure a perfectly straight grain line. I don't know if you've ever bought low-cost fast fashion t-shirts and over time the side seam twists a little bit or it warps a bit out of shape. That is to do with a poor cut grain line, and so the accuracy in which you cut out your pattern pieces is highly important. Other preparation steps include fusing, include adding your tailor tacks and transferring your markings, making sure that you clip every single notch so that when you come to construct it, these are used as balance points to put almost like pieces of the jigsaw together. Do not skip these preparation steps, making sure that when you are cutting your pattern and fabric, everything is ironed flat, because anything that has a wrinkle or a crease can actually throw out the measurements and affect the fit at the end of the day. We want our clothes to fit us so that we feel good. Other areas including preparation involve pinning within the seam allowance only, especially if your pattern piece is cut on the fold. You do not want to be pinning down that fold line because it could perforate your fabric and actually be visible on the garment once worn. Things like stay stitching necklines, where we create a line of stitching within our seam allowance around the neckline or an armhole, helps it stop warping out of shape as we continue to work with the rest of the garment. So if you're putting in a sleeve or you're putting a facing on a scoop neck or anything like that, having that line of stay stitching is going to stop it from stretching, again helping you achieve a really good fit. So above all, please do not skip any of the preparation steps. They're not there to annoy you. They are there to help you create really good, high quality professional clothing, and it's these small little attention to detail steps that actually have the biggest results. Complementary to that tip then is actually getting comfortable with hand sewing. I know so many people say that they hate doing it, but I really must encourage you to give it a go. Challenge yourself to try and hand sew at least one element of your garment on any sewing project. 9 out of 10 times this might be the hemline for you, but hand sewing can really elevate your projects, giving you invisible finishes that are actually impossible to achieve via a machine. You can do a slip stitch where you just pick up a couple of the fibers at a time, and if you have a color matched thread, then this is going to give a really invisible, neat, high standard couture, there we go, I said couture finish to your garments. And actually, if you can get in the groove with it, it can be really therapeutic. I would advise investing in some beeswax. This is going to help you condition your thread, so you just run your threads through it a couple of times, run your nail across your thread length just to remove any of the excess. Not only is this going to strengthen your thread, this is also going to help it avoid tangling or knotting when you're doing longer elements of work. Please give it a go, report back to me on how you get on and how this elevates your garments. Another thing, if we are sewing with curvy edges, how curvy those curves are. If they are concave, meaning that the curve goes inwards, you want to be clipping that, which is just basically a little snip into the seam allowance. Do not cut through your stitch line. It is really important that we maintain the strength of that seam. And if it is convex, meaning that it goes outwards, then we want to be notching it, meaning we take out a small triangle of fabric. What this is going to achieve is releasing any pressure. We're going to have a really clean curve. So many alliteration going on here, and give that a really good press for nice professional clean finished lines. On top of this, we want to be grading our seams to reduce bulk. This just involves trimming away any excess. Say you have 4 layers of fabric that are sandwiched together. It might be a case of trimming the first layer as close to the stitching as possible, the second layer with a couple millimeters left, the third layer a couple millimeters more after that, so that it slowly graduates out and really reduces the bulk. So when we are turning that round and bagging it through, there's no unsightly ridge of all this bulk in the seam allowance, and it really creates a nice professional smooth finish. And then finally, I know we blitzed through quite a lot in this quick tutorial, but finally, make friends with your iron. I have always been taught that pressing without fear can actually hide a multitude of sins. So do not be afraid to press, and also get into the habit of pressing at every stage. Of course, if you are sewing up multiple seams at once, you don't necessarily want to be getting up from your machine, pressing one seam, going back and stitching again, getting up and pressing it, yada yada yada. You can see where this is going, but it really is good practice so that you are making sure at every step of the way in your construction process you are giving it a really good professional finish. Pressing it out, making sure that all your seams lie smooth and flat. If you don't do this at every stage, you might get to a point where you can no longer access that seam. You've sewn a little bit too far, and so you can't really get into the nooks and the crannies. But using a press cloth, depending what type of fabric you have, can be really useful, especially if you want to protect it and you're not sure on the heat of the iron in comparison to your textile and we want to avoid any damage. So a pressing cloth can literally just be a scrap of calico or anything that you have to hand, but it puts that layer between your final fabric and the iron to make sure that no damage occurs. But I really do encourage you to give everything a very good press so that you have a nice, crisp, clean, finished garment once you have worked through your sewing projects. And there we have it, my friends. I thought I would blitz through a few beginner-friendly tips that I still use to this day. This isn't a case of us elevating and evolving into different skills. I use every single one of these tips in my day-to-day sewing. So it's really good to refamiliarize yourself. It's really good as a starting point in which to learn how to construct professional standard clothing. And so I really hope that you enjoyed this video. And of course, if you wanted to expand a little bit further on this, come and join us in the DPL Atelier, my high-value, low-cost fashion membership where we create, cut and construct our dream wardrobes. Over the course of 3 months, we pick a different garment style, and together as a creative community, we bring it to life. But you don't need to follow along with that optional framework. There's hundreds of tutorials involved. You have sewing patterns included, online courses, draping on the stand, drafting your own patterns to your measurements. It really is a well-rounded, fully functioning fashion process for you to actually develop your own unique creative approach. So come and join us, come and have a look what it's all about, and I cannot wait to see you behind the doors of the DPL Atelier. Take care, and I will catch you on the flip side.